way that we look at toxicology, which is the field or discipline of science that determines what things are harmful at what doses, there's a couple problems here. One, the first is that they are using a very outdated model, which dates back to the 15th century with Paracelsus, or 16th century, and which, he's the guy that coined what ultimately became the dose makes the poison. And this is the sort of reflexive comment that people make when they're like, oh, that stuff's not really toxic, it's the dose makes the poison. And that's a very, it's a yes and, there's some duality there, right? So it's yes, absolutely, there are some things where the dose makes the poison, which means, in simple terms, the more of something that you're exposed to, the worse the effect is, and the less of something that you're exposed to, the less the effective. And so like radiation, very classic example of what's referred to as a linear dose response curve. So that is what the dose makes the poison looks like, charted on a graph. And so the statement that the dose makes the poison is true, but it's partial, because it's not a full representation of the reality of how we are physiologically responding to certain types of toxicants. And so when we're looking at things, for example, that are hormone mimics, that are endocrine disrupting chemicals, those in particular, the decades now of research into endocrine disrupting chemicals, this goes back to the 90s, right? This is not a new thing, we're just learning more about it now, shows that the more profound effects, the more profound negative health effects actually happen at levels that are infinitesimally small. And the reason for that response is because our physiology, our hormones, already are tuned to operate at infinitesimally small levels of hormones, because those are the levels of hormones that are naturally in the body. So the body's already tuned to respond to what would be the equivalent of like parts per trillion levels of estrogen or thyroid hormone or whatever coursing through our bodies. And so when we're exposed to environmental chemicals that are endocrine disrupting at extremely low doses, they can be super problematic in terms of not our acute health, right? Not acute health issues. Somebody even just said to me recently on social media, like, oh, if lipstick was so toxic, why aren't people pouring into emergency rooms dropping dead? And I'm like, well, first of all, why is death the only endpoint that we care about?